Good morning. Today we are in Parsha Kitise, and it's a very multifaceted Parsha, a lot going on. In between discussing matters of the Mishkan and then the golden calf, which leads to the breaking of the first tablets, and then God's forgiveness and the reinscribing of the second tablets, between the Mishkan and the rest that goes on, there's a section which once again commands the people to keep the Shabbat. So how can we understand the meaning of Shabbat as it's given in this place? So one of the essential practices in Judaism, the fourth of the 10 commandments, is to refrain from work on the seventh day, to sanctify it and make it holy. But the exact definition of rest and the kinds of labor prohibited on the Shabbat are not explicitly stated in the parts of the Torah. And the sages of the Torah, the sages of the Talmud, explain that what the Torah is alluding to is there are 39 categories of prohibited labor called melachot. So we have to see what are these 39 categories, where are they coming from? And whenever the Torah is discussing the commandment to build the tabernacle, then the Torah also restates the commandments of Shabbat. So there's this connection between the tabernacle and Shabbat that we're going to talk about today. So after more than 2 Torah portions dedicated to the specific details of the tabernacle, the sanctuary, the Torah concludes with the theme of Shabbat. And it says, the children of Israel observe the Shabbat to make the Shabbat throughout the generations as an everlasting covenant. Between me and the children of Israel is forever a sign that in 6 days the Lord created the heaven and the earth, and on the 7th day he ceased and rested. The Sabbath came from these commandments. Nobody in the world took a day off until God gave these commandments. So here is a new covenant. The Shabbat is a covenant. Sabbath is Shabbat. From the juxtaposition of the Shabbat and the commandment to build the temple, the tabernacle, that they're always right next to each other, the sages derive that the tabernacle may not be constructed on Shabbat. And this implies that any labor that was needed for the construction of the temple, of the tabernacle, is considered labor, milacha, according to the Jewish law, and it's prohibited on the Shabbat. Okay, so what we're saying is that the work of building the tabernacle, which are the 39 milachot, making a fire, weaving, doing all kinds of construction, dyeing clothing, all these things that are needed for the construction of the tabernacle, these are all called labor, melachot, and these are exactly what is not allowed on the Shabbat. So why does the Torah give its definition of labor through what seems to be unrelated by connecting it to the Shabbat, to the tabernacle? So it seems like the Shabbat and the tabernacle are being put right next to each other, and the laws of what we're not allowed to do on the Shabbat come from what we have to do in building the tabernacle. So what does this mean? So what does the prohibition of working on Shabbat have to do with building a sanctuary? So the Torah is teaching us about the purpose of labor. The usual understanding is that we spend 6 days of the week working and pursuing our physical deeds. And on the 7th day, we rest from the pursuit of the physical, and we dedicate our day to our family, our soul, our spiritual life. But the Torah is telling us that we should think about labor in the context of the work necessary to construct the sanctuary. So the work we're doing in the week has to do with building the sanctuary. So the halachic definition of labor is derived from the 39 kinds of work used for the construction of the sanctuary, because the spiritual purpose of all of our labor is to create a metaphorical sanctuary, a home for God. So the Torah is making a connection between our weekly work as the way that we create a dwelling place for God in this world, and the same as we do in building the Mishkan, or later on the Beit HaMikdash. So what we're saying is that the work of the week and the work of building the Beit HaMikdash are so related and connected that we have to know that one comes next to the other and one derives from the other. So how do we do this? We do this by using our physical possessions, what we offer to the building and service of the temple, and our experiences of the week, our experiences in the world, as we utilize the materials of the world. And in this, we enhance our soul and advance the purpose for which we were created, to transform this earth into a vessel for godliness by filling the world with goodness and kindness. So during the 6 days of creative work, we do the work of making this world a dwelling place for God. That's what we're doing in time by making this world a place, a dwelling for God. So the Torah is telling us that our creative work is to take place on the 6 days of the work week, and then we stop working and go into a different dimension, the dimension of Shabbat. So the 6 days are one dimension, that of building and making a place for the divine, and the Shabbat is a different dimension altogether. The making of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, is told in very long and detailed descriptions. Interestingly, the whole story is told with all of its details in the Torah, which is telling the story twice. So all these parshas that we are learning right now are telling, we will see that they're telling it one set, then it will tell the whole thing again, all the details of making the Mishkan in another set. So first, the details are told as divine instruction, what God wanted done. Telling Moshe, tell the people to, command the people to. And then the second time, the details were told, and that was as the people actually fulfilled all the instructions, and they built, and they brought, and they did. So one is what God is saying should be done, and the other one is what the people did. But in both descriptions, what God instructed and what the people did, the construction of the Mishkan is juxtaposed to the command of the Shabbos. And what are the halachic, legal, and spiritual implications? First, according to Jewish tradition, placing the law of Shabbat next to the description of the tabernacle was intended to establish the rule that the Shabbat overrides the making of the tabernacle. Not only is the seventh day a time when secular work comes to an end, it also brings rest from the holiest kind of work, making a house for God. So interestingly, the Mishkan is built in 6 days, then it stops. And on Shabbat, there is no building of the Mishkan because Shabbat overrides the making of the Mishkan. Not only is the seventh day a time when secular work comes to an end, but making a house for God also ends during time. So the oral tradition, now we have this definition of work, melacha, that which is prohibited on the Shabbos, in terms of the 39 activities involved in making the sanctuary, that is what stops. On a more metaphysical level, the sanctuary mirrors, it's the human counterpart to the divine creation of the universe. Just as divine creation ends in the Sabbath, so does human creation. So we have something very interesting here, that God makes the world in 6 days. This creation of the world is happening in 6 days. That's from above, from God. From below, we have that the Jewish people are building the tabernacle. That's from below. From below means from our human enterprise, bringing that up into the world. And just like God does his creation in 6 weeks, in 6 days, and then stops, and then it says, and then God rests. So also we are doing our work from below to make a dwelling place for God in the Mishkan. But when it comes to Friday afternoon, we also stop. So now we see this parallel. And let's notice that there's a difference between the telling of God's instruction to build the sanctuary and Moshe's instruction to the people. So in the first place, in the first case, the command of the Shabbos, when God is going to tell the people to do this and this, in the first case, the command of the Shabbos, of the Sabbath, appears at the end, after the details of the construction. In the second, when the people are doing it, it appears at the beginning, before the details. Why is that? So what we're saying is that when God is saying it, the Shabbat comes at the end. When we're talking about the people's building, they put the telling of the Shabbat before. Why? So the Talmud in the Tractate of Shabbat raises the question, what happens? This is a well-known question in the Talmud. What happens if a person is far away from where people live and you forget what day it is? How do you observe the Shabbos? Because you don't remember when it is. So what are you supposed to do? Because you are supposed to observe the Sabbath. And the Talmud offers 2 answers. Rav Huna said, if one is traveling on a road or in the wilderness and does not know when it is the Sabbath, he must count 6 days from the day he realizes he has forgotten and observe the next one. In other words, he has to start counting 6 days, and then the day after that, he's already has to observe the Sabbath. Rav Chia ben Rav, a different one of the sages, says he must observe 1 day and then count 6 days. In other words, Rav Huna is saying, count 6 days, and the 7th day will be the Sabbath. Rav Chia is saying, start right away. If you like, let's say it's today. So tonight, we're going to start counting because the first complete day is when it's going to be the Sabbath. And so tonight and tomorrow will be the Sabbath because that's what you're going to do. And then after that, count 6 days. And then the day after that will again be Sabbath. So what's the reason for their different understandings? So one sage holds that it's like the world's creation. Remember that we said that, that when God created, he created for 6 days, and then on the 7th day he rested. And the other sage holds that it's like the case of Adam Harishon, who was made in the Garden of Eden, the first man. So from God's point of view, the Sabbath was the 7th day. From the point of view of the first human beings, Adam and Chava, who were created on the 6th day, on Friday, the Sabbath was about the whole first day. So Adam and Chava were created on Friday, and that night they began to celebrate the Shabbat. Now, the debate is about which perspective we should adopt. Now, at the simplest level, we understand why the Sabbath comes last when God is speaking about the tabernacle. since God created for 6 days and then rested on the 7th day. And then we understand why. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then we understand why the Sabbath comes first when Moshe, a human being, is talking about it. For God, the Sabbath was the last day, and for human beings, it was the first. Adam was not created into a world where there were 6 days of a week, 6 days of work. He was told what to do, and all he had to do was do that for some hours, and then it was going to be going into the Sabbath. When it comes to divine creation, there is no gap between intention and making it happen. God spoke and the world came into being. So God doesn't have his own process. God just let there be light, and there was light. And in relation to God, Isaiah the prophet says, I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I do all that I please. So God knows in advance how things will turn out. So when God makes the house, the house is there, just the way God intended it. No construction process. A human being needs to have the idea, needs to work it out, and then there's a construction process, and then, God willing, there's a house. But God just knows in advance how it's going to be. This is not so with human beings, where it's completely different. And a lot of times when a human being is doing an action, often we can't see the outcome at the beginning. In whatever we do, it often doesn't turn out at all similar to what we had expected. Even with something simple, the soup doesn't taste the same way it did last time when we used the same recipe. It doesn't go like that. Because in the human situation, how long we make the soup is never even exactly the way and exactly the amounts and exactly the time, even when we measure it. And it could be different. And the water could be different on that day. Everything could be different on that day. The spice is a day older. So it doesn't turn out exactly the same. But people think that they can make plans. And often the plans turn out different than what they thought was so obviously clear to them that it was going to be. The idea that you can plan human behavior in advance, you have to know we can only plan to a certain degree. We can't say for sure how it's going to turn out. My sister-in-law once asked for a recipe of a mandelbrot, for a cookie that I make. And it was really funny, the whole story with that. But I said, okay, here's the recipe. She made the recipe and said, it doesn't taste at all the same. We thought, but I said, did you do it like this? And did you? Yeah, I did everything like you said. But you know what we realized? She lives in Israel. The flour is different. The water is different. The stove is different. So she did exactly the correct recipe, but everything was not the same. So we have to know that also we have to know when we realize that we can do our part, but we can't exactly plan what's going to happen. We have to also understand that God's divine providence is always involved in human situations. So how much traffic there's going to be, and the mood of the person that you're going to meet, all these are divine providence. And so that's why it's not exactly the same. But as we said, when God creates, it's the way that God intends it to be that will become the reality. So the creative work we have to remember, God doesn't have to work, but God's creative process goes through as God makes it, then becomes complete, and God rests on the seventh day. The other approach of when to count the Shabbat is to reveal the end of the beginning. And that's what God did. The Shabbat begins the week as it did for Adam and Chava when it was the first whole day of the week. So in other words, God wanted to show them the end of time, when it was going to be. We'll talk about what that means. He wanted to show them right away. Here, you have a few hours to do your work, and then I'm going to show you what's going to be. Of course, they didn't do the work properly, so the Sabbath that they had wasn't the one that Hashem, so to speak, intended to show them. And that's the meaning of the Shabbat. The Shabbat is not simply a day of rest. It's an anticipation of the end of history, the Messianic age. That doesn't mean the end of the world. It means the end of the work of the world. So that's what the Sabbath is. Every Sabbath, we are anticipating the Messianic age. And what does that mean? On that day, it's as if we re-enter the Garden of Eden. And we don't, on the Sabbath, we don't work on doing. We are content to be. We're not allowed to manipulate the world. Instead, we celebrate the world as it's God's supreme work of art. That God made this world, and we walk to the place we're going to pray, and we notice the beauty. It's not about making things happen. It's about being. And the praying is also part of the being. And the meal is also part of the being. We're not allowed to exercise power or dominance over other human beings. In other words, we don't make people work, or even domestic animals. Rich and poor live in the Sabbath in the same way, with equal dignity and freedom. So, so the Shabbat is like the utopia of Olam Haba, the world to come. So we enter this Gan Eden world to come. We enter it every week, one day in 7. So the Sabbath is like a preparation for an ideal society that has not yet come to pass, but will come to pass, because we know what we're aiming for, because we experienced it at the beginning. In other words, when God says to Adam and Chava, and when God speaks about it at the beginning, and we go right into the Sabbath, it's like we have a view of what's going to be the end, of where we're aiming for, because God gave us that experience in the beginning. So starting from our spiritual genetic code, when we were all descended from Adam and Chava, we experienced Shabbat right away in Gan Eden, which was a preview of what we're all going to have, which is this ideal society. One of the Shabbat songs that we sing on Friday night has the words, Me'ein olam haba, Yom Shabbat Menucha. Like the world to come is the day of Shabbat rest. So that's what the Sabbath is. We're going into the world to come. We're going into Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden. And we now begin to sense the meaning of making the tabernacle. In the wilderness, so we've been talking about Shabbat, now let's compare it to the tabernacle and see what the connection is. Why every time there's going to be either we're going to talk about the tabernacle or we finish talking about the tabernacle, we're talking about Shabbat. In the wilderness, long before they crossed the Jordan and entered the promised land, God told the Israelites to build a miniature universe. That's what the Mishkan is. That's what the temple is, a miniature universe. It would be a place of carefully detailed order, just as the universe is a place of carefully detailed order. That's why every socket in the temple, everything was made with measurements. Everything had specifics. Everything in the temple had specific measurements. Nothing was, oh, just put that over there. No, everything was completely detailed. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs brings a comparison to what scientists call the Anthropic Principle. This is fascinating. This is a scientific principle called the Anthropic Principle. And the scientists concluded that for the world to exist with life as we know it, the laws of physics and chemistry had to be finely tuned to be exactly what it is. So it's saying that God didn't just toss together a salad, that God made a very specific world by making it in a specific way. And if any detail would be different, a degree hotter or colder, or a change in the chemical elements, the world would not be hospitable to life. This is fascinating. In other words, see, details. If anything would be different, it wouldn't work. Not for the life that we have of human beings and animals and weather, that God did it exactly this way in order for this world to be what it is. That's the Anthropic Principle. And God does not allow human beings to mess around with that, because this is how God wants the world to be. God wants the world. God creates the world like this. So just like this, the tabernacle has to be exact in its construction and dimensions. So the building of the tabernacle was a symbolic prototype also of the building of a society. God made the world in the way that he wants us to be, but God also plans for a society that will be the way that God wants it to be. So the building of the tabernacle was this prototype of the building of a society. So just as it was an earthly home for the divine presence, so would human society become if the Israelites honored God's laws. The mitzvot, the commandments, which create the fine details of how the world is meant to work. Ultimately, every person has commandments from God. The 7 Noahide laws are the commandments from God for all the people in the world. Commandments that were given at the time of Noah. That's why they're called 7 Noahide laws. And the 613 commandments that God gave for the Jewish people. And when we all do the mitzvot in the way that God wants them, and we see that the mitzvot have very fine details of how the world is meant to work. And living in this kind of society is the harmony of existence that we haven't yet experienced, since we are living in a world of work and struggling and conflict and competition, that we know what we would like, or we're figuring out what we would like, and there is a method where we're trying to make it happen. So we're going toward what we would like. But God wanted us to know what we're aiming for so that it could be clear where we're going through life and time. You know, Shabbat is so essential, and understanding that the Shabbat is where we're going. We'll talk a little more about this, is so helpful. And there's no other way, because this is God's world. So it is going to be. When the actual making of the tabernacle building by the people was described, the Shabbat commandment came first. Even though in the bigger picture, the Shabbat of history will come last. So the Shabbat of history, let's talk about that for a minute, is the Messianic age, the world to come. What is the Sabbath of history? In other words, we said that God is making a world and that there comes to a point where there is going to be what we call, when we talk about a day of rest, the Talmud tells us that a day also means 1,000 years. So let's understand this Shabbat of history. The Talmud tells us that the history of the world is 6 eras. Like we have 6 days, the Talmud says that the history of the world is 6 eras of 1,000 years each. So each 1,000 years, different things are going on. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides describes a unique theme for each millennium of the actual history of what happened in each millennium, corresponding to the themes of the 6 days in which the world was created. In other words, God is saying, this is what happens on the first day, this is what's happening on the second day, this is what's happening on the third day. And each 1,000 years in the history, there is a history of what is going on. And we see that each 1,000 years has a character of his own. So this is really essential. In the Jewish mind, history is always going somewhere. It's not just about something specific that takes place, but we're going forward. We're going toward the Sabbath. And the Talmud is saying that the 6th millennium are bringing us to what's called a day that is entirely rest and serenity for eternal time. In other words, we're going into a Shabbat that is going to last for 1,000 years. Think about that. Calm, peaceful. So good. In Hashem's presence, not having to work and struggle. So time is leading us to a time beyond time. Now, according to this way of looking at the world, which is how we look at the world, we entered the 6th and final day of history with the year 5001 of the Jewish calendar, which was the year 1240 on the Gregorian calendar. So we've been in the 6th day for quite a while. The 6th day means the day of preparation for the Shabbat. In 1902, Rabbi Sholem Dovber of Lubavitch mapped out the 6th millennium into periods of a 24-hour day. So according to this, and we're now in the year 5782, which is in the afternoon of Friday of the 6th millennium before Shabbat. So in other words, no wonder things are so messy out there, because we're making Shabbos. There's people who bake their own challahs, so all this flour is all over the place, and there's people sweeping and dusting and pulling all the chairs away so that they could make sure that the place under the table is really clean before they set the table. So we are in the afternoon of Friday of the 6th millennium before Shabbat. So what is supposed to happen? Before the day of serenity, of peace, of Shabbat, and a time beyond time enters, we must first pass through the Messianic period. And the central theme of that era, as the Rambam Maimonides writes, what's going to happen is the only occupation of the entire world will be just to know God. In other words, whatever people do will be a way of discovering the creator of this world within his world by his creatures. So we're not right now, Mashiach is coming. The Geula process is happening as we are getting ready to go into the Shabbat, when it's really, really, that's all that's happening. If you'd like to read more about this, about what happened in each of the 1,000 words, in each of the 1,000 years of the 6th millennium, I recommend Zvi Freeman's article, Freeman, which you can find on Chabad.org, and it's called The 6th Millennium and the Age of Mashiach. So that is worthwhile if you want to read more about this. So God made known, we're coming back to the tabernacle. We've now been talking about time. So God made known the end at the beginning, the completed rest that follows creative labor, the peace that will one day be our reality instead of the disagreement and complexity of the many years before the Shabbat time. So God was showing us a glimpse of the destination before beginning the journey. So essential for us to understand where we're going. A lot of people say, I don't know where I'm going. Every day, it's just a day. What difference does it make? That is not how we think. We know where we're going. Every day we're going to the day that's Yom Shekulo Shabbos, a day that is completely Sabbath. And a Yom, remember, is 1,000 years. We're going through 1,000 years of Sabbath. And in case you want to know what's going to happen after that, a lot. I'm not going to talk about this in depth. I was once in a class, my teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, taught a class about what happens after that. More revelation, more revelation, more revelation. Because there's the Shabbat, then and what happens after 7 times of Shabbat? Then we have the Jubilee year, the 50. That's going to be huge and huge and huge revelation of God, because as time goes on, we are more able to receive more revelation. So don't worry, it's not ending on the Shabbat. It's not ending in the 7th millennium. There's more to come. Stay tuned. Okay, so only those who know that they're traveling, what they're traveling to, will get there having the consciousness of God's intention in creating us and our purpose in time and space. So we know we're going toward a place. Soon we will be sitting at the Shabbos table with Mashiach, who will give us the knowledge that we're yearning for now. We'll feel more and more true connectedness with God. And we'll see the parallel, we'll live the parallel between the building of the Mishkan in space and the 6 days of the building of the Mishkan in space and the 6 days of the week going toward Shabbat. We're going to see how they are parallel, but that they go together. We're going to start to see them converge. While God gave the revelation of the presence of the divine presence at Sinai, that God did from above, as we call it, what God really wanted and wants now is the participation and partnership of the people through their labor and service in building the tabernacle. Included in that was the preparation for its construction by all the Jewish men, women, and children who donated the materials to build it. So God wanted and wants our involvement in this process of getting to Shabbat and getting to the Mishkan or the temple. The purpose of the Mishkan, to make for me a sanctuary so that I may dwell among them. What is this? What is this about? To make a place where God will rest his presence in our midst. And the Midrash states, when did the divine presence reveal itself in the world? On the day the Mishkan was erected. So there's all this process, there's all this building, and then there comes a point where it's done. And then in our avoda, our work, in the already built Mishkan, or later the temple in Jerusalem, through the Mishkan in space, and also within us, we can make a vehicle for connection with God and a vessel for God's blessings to come to us. That's in the dimension of space. In the dimension of time, we see that God created and is responsible for the whole world. During the weekdays, our job is to make the world into a vessel for God by doing our work in the world. This makes the world a vehicle and a vessel for God's blessings. So the work that we do during the week in time is parallel to the building of the tabernacle in space. We do the 39 kinds of work during the week that build a place for God. And then we stop working. As the tabernacle becomes like Shabbat, both of which connections in time space receive the revelation of the divine presence within this world, which shows God's absolute unity. It's very interesting. Torah science talks about this, and science knows about it in theory, that time and space are actually one dimension. Time space comes together. Now, personally, I feel this going into the Shabbat because of the way, it's interesting, the way we talk about Shabbat. After we say, oh, it's time to light candles, we go into Shabbat. We stop talking about time. When we say we go into Shabbat, wait a minute, it sounds like a place. We go into it. It's a space, in the space of Shabbat. Because when we're in Shabbat, time, space are one. Okay, so we know when the minyan begins, and we know what time the guests are coming, or we are the guests, or the time that we plan to have lunch. It's not like we're not aware of time, but it becomes time space. That lunch is going to be after we come home from prayer. It's like time and space come together. But during the building time, I have to have an appointment where the construction crew is coming, or a time when I'm going to cook the soup, so that the time and the space gets together in the right way. So we see that this unity of not working, we have stopped work and stopped building, they become the connections in time space to receive the revelation of the divine presence within the world. And that is showing us God's absolute unity. So we see then there's a unity that's coming together down here to show God's unity. So let me just add one little thing. Our sages derive from the words he, meaning God, ceased working and rested, that there's an additional measure of soul that is granted to us on the arrival of Shabbat. With the departure of Shabbat, it departs as well. So we're saying that we're getting an extra soul on the Shabbat. And then After Shabbat, that extra soul goes away. And our rabbis explain that spices are sniffed on Saturday night during the Havdalah service to make the person's soul calm, because it's disturbed by the departure of the additional soul. Now, I want to say it's not that an additional soul is created. It's that certain aspects of soul are within us, and certain aspects of soul are, let's say, above us, so to speak. And we want to bring more soul in. That's part of the purpose of all of this, is so that more and more soul comes into our bodies. And that's what we're working on now. But on Shabbat, an extra measure of soul comes into us higher than the usual consciousness we have. And when the Shabbat is over, it just goes back up. It doesn't disappear. It disappears from our consciousness. So this portion has an effect on the kind of Shabbos we have. And this is a symbol of that our Shabbat is more holy because it's not like another day of the week. So the 10 Commandments speak of Shabbos in and of itself, and our portion is addressing, our Parsha is addressing the effect that Shabbos has on the Jewish people. So this is particularly apparent with what Rashi says about it is a sign between me and you. It says it's a great symbol between us that I have chosen you, and in that I have given you my day of rest. So Rashi is telling us that the Jews' rest on the Sabbath involves more than just relaxing and resting from labor, but that it's also God's day of rest. And as a result, the rest on this day is affecting an elevation with the Jew in himself, that the Jew is experiencing a complete change in his being, because God is also resting, and because God is resting with us. This is a covenant that we're doing together. We're resting together, and we get revelation, because remember, that's what the Sabbath is about. That's what we spoke about, that the 7th millennium is a place of more revelation. So more revelation comes into us on the Sabbath. And this type of Sabbath tranquility and peace can be called an extra soul. And really, one way of looking at it is that God's tranquility and the quiet that God enjoys, whatever that means, is given on Shabbos to each of us and within each of us. So I want to say another thing about this, which is very parallel, because that's why we sniff the spices on Sabbath. Smell is the holiest of the senses, of the 5 senses. Smell was not involved in the sin of the tree of knowledge. Smell is a very holy sense, and it says that Mashiach, Messiah, will judge by smell. So we smell spices so that even though the extra soul consciousness has gone up, that we're getting a consciousness of smell to bring us more smell. Now, I have to tell you that I used to feel very sad when the Shabbat was ended. I am not the person, some people, just saying we have another 3 minutes, just a second, 3 minutes, and they're waiting for the 3 minutes, they jump up and start doing the laundry. That is not me. I don't jump up and run out of Shabbat. If I'm learning something, I just keep learning. If I'm reading, I keep learning. Then okay. So this is what happened. I used to feel very sad until my teacher, Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, taught something which was helpful to me, which is exactly what we're talking about. Shabbat is like a place in time, a place which is full of peace. We go into Shabbat, And I didn't want to go out because it felt to me like Shabbat shouldn't end. And it shouldn't end. We should have 1,000 years of Shabbat that goes to another cycle of Shabbos and another cycle and a jubilee and higher revelation. My soul knew that it was yearning for Yom Shakulo Shabbat, for the day, meaning the 1,000 years, that is completely like the Sabbath, the 1,000 years of Shabbat that would be full of peace and godly revelation. That's what I wanted. Didn't feel right to me that it should end. So I felt resistant to the time on my yearly calendar when it said, at this time, Shabbat is over. Rabbi Ginsburg explained that during the week, we are building the tabernacle by doing the 39 kinds of work that it takes to accomplish this. Exactly what we've been learning about. To build the world, to be in readiness for the revelation of God in time and space, and in our own souls and in our bodies. Shabbat is a taste of that revelation. But Rabbi Ginsburg said that every week we're building the temple during the week, and we hope that Mashiach will be revealed. The temple will be rebuilt, and that we will stay in Shabbat. And it will be. But if that is not the situation when Shabbat comes to an end for this week, if we discover that, not yet, even though it's Shabbat and Mashiach has come, some people say Mashiach can't come on Shabbat. And I heard the Lubavitcher Rebbe say, let Mashiach come on Shabbat and he'll explain how he did it. In other words, he will say the halacha, why it's completely fine for him to do it, which means that, yes, we can go into Shabbat, Mashiach can come, the Beit HaMikdash, which some people say is already built above, can come down, and we're in Shabbat, and whoa, here's Mashiach, and here's the Beit HaMikdash, and we don't have to go out of Shabbat at all. But if that's not the situation when Shabbat comes to an end for the week, then when we go out of the level of the temple that we have built in this past week and rested in the Shabbat, in other words, what did we do all week? We built the level of temple that we could, and then we went into the Shabbat, and time-space became one. And if this Shabbat wasn't on the level of Mashiach has come, and the Mishkan is here, now we go out of Shabbat to begin a new week, which means to begin to build a higher level of temple. So it's not on a flat line, week Shabbos, week Shabbos, week Shabbos, week Shabbos, so what? No, it's that we're building up the temple, and we go into the place of rest, of time, space. And if Mashiach comes and the temple comes, good, and it will be so. There will come a time when it will be that. But if not, it means that we need to build a higher level of temple and then go into a higher level of Shabbat. And even if we have to wait more, we're going up to a higher level of building the temple and building during the week of time and place. And then we go into Shabbat. So once I understood that, it changed something in me. So each week we're doing the work of making the vessels for the revelation of God through our own choices and experiences in time and space. So as the Baal Shem Tov says, whenever through divine providence, God is giving us an experience, like God puts in front of us a person to meet, there is something in this experience that has to do with bringing more godliness into the world. And so here is this experience, and how we handle it, it has to do with how we're building. So knowing that I was going out of the Shabbat to build a higher level of temple, that gave me peace and the motivation to begin a new week. Because it wasn't an end, it was taking further steps toward where we're going, which is to the Yom Shekula Shabbos, 1,000 years of peace and revelation. So the time will soon come when Mashiach will be revealed and the Beis Hamikdash will be revealed through our service. Remember, God wanted our partnership and wants our partnership. And then we will live Shabbos with the rebuilt temple, enjoying the peace of God's revealed presence. We need to know that knowing this is really important for us. We know where we're going now, and our consciousness is changing as the Mishkan within us, as the tabernacle within us is being built through our work in every moment and every day. So through every Shabbat that awakens our souls and brings the world's reality closer, we are building on the way to the Shabbat and the Beit HaMikdash, and the reality of the world is changing. Our consciousness is changing as the world and we are getting closer and having more awareness of God in us and in the world. So this is what we are doing. This is where we are going, and we are very much involved and on the way into the process. Remember, it's Friday afternoon. There is no other way. God is not adding another day to the week. This is God's plan. So we're on the way. Mashiach is coming. Geula is coming more and more. And our awareness is becoming more and more aware of God's presence in who we are and in everything that we do. So may we, each and every one of us, do what we're here to do with joy. Remember, it's Adar also, with joy. And we have to have patience, because for me, this was very difficult. It's Shabbos. I have to go out of Shabbos. I don't want to go out of Shabbos. I like Shabbos. I want to stay in Shabbos. And patience is a very important piece of the work, because when God decides, remember, when God decides something's happening, boom, done. Okay, so God might allow it to go through process in the world just so that it will come down into our reality and our consciousness. But we need to have patience that if it's going to be that we're going toward Shabbat with all the hope that this will be it, and it could be in any moment. But if there's patience that we need to have another Shabbat, although personally, I'm ready now, let's go. We want Mashiach now. We don't want to wait. But if we do have to wait another moment, it means that there is another step in the process that God wants of godliness integrated and our building toward Shabbos. So may we do what we are here to do, and may we have great success, and may our time space be completely dedicated to God and revelation, and may we experience a beautiful coming of Mashiach, and may it be now with all the blessings.